Hello, everyone. This is Dave Warner with Small Town Life, part of the Studio 25 podcast network. And we have an interesting guest today. It's Dr. Michael F. Weisberg. He's an MD, and he wrote a book that's climbing up the charts there on Amazon. It's called A Second Shot. Now, one of the questions would be, we're in Little Falls, we're in the Mohawk Valley, and you're somewhere else, right? So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm living in Dallas, Texas now, and I was originally born and raised in Huntington, West Virginia. Went to school, and I was an English literature major, and I've always loved writing, but always loved medicine also, and decided I wanted to be a doctor. But then I decided I had won some writing competitions, so I decided short story competitions, and I decided that I wanted to write a novel. My first novel was called The Hospitalist, which was published in 2014. And it's really about how the art of medicine became a business in the 21st century, and how when you went to the hospital, your own doctor no longer followed you there and took care of you, but you were taken care of by a doctor who had never seen you before and knew absolutely nothing about you. I followed that up doing a TED Talk on that subject in 2016. And then in 2019, I released my second novel, which was called In the End, which is my search for the meaning to life. And then this is my third book. It's my first nonfiction, my first true crime book. And just it came about just because the relative of the police officer who was murdered happened to be my patient. She was the daughter. She was his daughter.
So the book is called A Second Shot. It's the pursuit of justice in Maryland's oldest cold case murder. And, on your first book, we could talk for hours, but we're not going to go there, okay?
Okay, whatever. That's fine. Dave.
Hospitalists and that whole system. I don't think there's anybody in the country who likes the way it is now.
No, but no one else besides myself has written a book about it, a fiction book, and really pointed out how absurd it is. And that's why that book was so unique.
Got it. And why was it fiction? Because it's a true story. We're all just living every day.
It was fiction because a lot of the characters in it are people that are based on people in true life.
Okay.
And I took from my own experiences.
So how you learned about the case because the daughter of the police officer that was slain was one of your patients. Tell me a little bit about that interaction, how that started, and then what caused you to think about, you know what, I need to write about this.
I had never had a patient referred to me by the doctor, Dr. Chancellor, who is a prominent family doctor in the area I practice in Plano, Texas, till he referred me her mother, Mrs. Hall, and she became my patient in the early 1990s. And 14 years that our practices overlapped, she was the only one. But then her daughter, Carolyn Philo, liked the way I took care of her mother. And so I've taken care of her for the last 30 some years. She came to me in 2021 for an office visit and said to me, would you like to write a book about my father and the murder? And they've just found the murderers of the murderer of my father. And she sat down, and in the middle of a busy clinical day, she took 30 minutes and told me the story about what had happened, and that the murderer had confessed and was being extradited from New York to Maryland. Everything was set up. The cold case detectives were willing to talk to me. The prosecution would lay everything out for me. And initially, I felt like, it's not really my area of expertise. You need more of a journalist. But the way she made it sounded like the whole story was there and just needed to be put into shape. And so I agreed to do it.
And what year was this when this happened?
This was in 2022.
Okay. All right. So do you know how the cold case unit figured it out?
I do. That's where the name of Second Shot comes. In murder cases, the police have what's called holdback, where they don't release all the information about a murder to the public. And some of it is held back so that when they interview suspects and they mention something that's not been told to the public, they realize that that person was there. And when they found this one suspect, he talked about the second shot. Now, I'm not going to talk about it now, but there was a whole bunch of different things that had to happen in order to get to the information that he had seen he had heard a second shot. And by him saying that, the detectives were able to focus in on him as being the suspect.
So that was that critical piece that they held back. The public wasn't even told how many shots were fired, correct? Or how many times he was
Yes,
hit.
that's exactly right. He was actually hit once. The first shot went and hit his flashlight, and the suspect also knew about the flashlight, which wasn't released. And then the second shot went through the back of his head, through his brain, and killed him.
Mm. Tell us a little bit about who this person was, who the police officer was.
J.T. Hall was a deputy sheriff. He was a 53-year-old man, married with two children. He would do anything to support his family. He worked during the day on bus transmissions. That was his regular job. But at night, 4 or 5 nights a week, he would be what you consider security patrol at the Manor Country Club, a beautiful country club in Rockville, Maryland. And he would get paid for doing that. And he also liked the idea of being part of the doing police work and doing this type of work. And so it seemed to be a natural fit for him. He was a man who was very family oriented, even though he worked so hard. He spent so much time with his family doing things for his family. His son Melvin ended up becoming the first person in their family to be college educated, and he ended up working for the CIA in the White House. And then their daughter, Carolyn, who asked me to write the book, worked a variety of jobs, very successful. Her husband was a policeman on the canine unit in the Montgomery County area in Maryland. And then they ended up moving to Texas. And he was a lawyer, Bob, and he wrote a lot of the title insurance laws for the state of New Mexico, as well as doing a lot of work in cases in Texas.
Mm. So Little Falls, so there's a connection to Little Falls where this is where they found the person, correct? When they were investigating, they found him here?
Yes, Larry Smith was born in Little Falls.
Ah.
He was one of four children, and he had an absent father who was never around and an alcoholic mother. So the four children spent most of their time in foster homes. Finally, when Larry was 7, he was the second oldest child. They were adopted. They were adopted by the family, the Beckers. Now, the Smith's mother, Larry's mother, said she would not allow one of her children to be adopted separately. All the Beckers really wanted was his older sister because they had just adopted a young baby who was a boy. But because of the mother's insistence that all four children be adopted together, they were, and they were adopted by this Smith family. I'm sorry, I beg your pardon, by the Becker family, and then moved to different places, but ended up in Montgomery County, Maryland, and ended up living on the Manor Country Club in one of the houses that was on the grounds of the Manor Country Club. But he spent his first 7 years in Little Falls. And then after he got out of prison for a robbery that he'd committed, and also from escaping from the prison, he served 8 years from 72 to 80. In 1980, he moved back to Little Falls, and that's where he was when the detectives found him.
It's not. I would suspect it's not the greatest place to hide out because it's right off the thruway and it's between Albany and Syracuse. It's not like it's way out in the woods, right?
Yeah, he had also changed his name back to Smith. He was known as Larry Becker in Maryland, but he did change the name back to Smith. But he certainly was, as you said, it was visible. The detective found his younger brother Leslie Becker's obituary, and in that it mentioned a Larry David Smith living in Little Falls, and they realized that that was the same person.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Did your background as a doctor help you in kind of forensically examining this case when they provided all the? I'm assuming the police gave you everything there was to look at.
The police gave me nothing.
Really?
Because when I agreed to do this, it was with the uh, knowledge that the Larry Smith had confessed to the crime, and it was just going to be a matter of sentencing him. And the whole book was going to revolve around the brilliance of these three female detectives who, after 50 years, had investigated the case, reevaluated the information completely, and come up with a suspect that no one else knew anything about. However, the first day I got to Maryland, I was informed that he had retracted his confession and he was now going to be represented by Covington and Burley, which is one of the largest and most successful, well-known law firms in Washington, D.C. So the police really could not tell me anything because they could have put me as a witness on the stand, the defense, and I knew nothing about it. And basically, I started from scratch. I had done research on the area, on the people involved, but it was basically a story that I had to tell.
Well, how did he afford a prestigious law firm like that?
Pro bono work. These
Okay.
law firms from Washington, D.C., these big firms, and I think it's this way in a lot of cities, look for cases that they can get their younger associates into so that they can get trial experience. And they go down to a place like Rockville, Maryland to do that. And that's how they were able to get them.
Okay. All right. So were you present at the trial? Did you follow it? How did that roll out?
Yes. So I was present at the trial and actually was there every day. And I talk about it every day, what happened at the trial. It was really the first trial that I had ever been the entire time there for. And it was an incredible experience for me. And I learned a tremendous amount about law, how the legal system works, how much goes on outside of the trial that you don't even realize.
So you were in the court, you had to kind of balance when you were investigating the information for the book, all these old school techniques of reel-to-reel technology or whatever, and then social media. Talk to me about working all of that, because when you go over that course of time, there's a lot of different technologies, a lot of different ways to find information. How did that feel for you?
Well, I found it fascinating how they were able to come up with the suspect, because you just talked about reel to reel. And in the box that the cold case evidence was kept in, there was a reel to reel tape. And that tape was mislabeled with another man's name. And so it was overlooked, and no one, because they didn't have the technology anymore to listen to it, no one really knew what it contained.
And they have those companies everywhere, right? Transfer your VHS to digital.
Right, exactly. Well, the detectives ended up having to go to the FBI, and they were able to make it into a digitalized tape that they could listen to. And that tape was not like I said, it was mislabeled. The tape was actually the suspect labeling himself and telling the story that he was a witness to the murder of J.T. Hall.
Ah. So did they even know that in their written reports that there was a witness? Or was this even the fact that he was a witness, despite the fact that he may have tripped himself up saying that he heard 2 shots and things like that, did they know there was a witness?
No.
Wow.
No one knew that. No one knew that at all until it came back. And I interviewed the original detective who was on the case, who had it for the first couple of years. O.W. Sweat is his name. And I talked to other people in the police department. No one knew anything about that.
Wow. In going back in an old case like that, did you run into the fact that there are people that had just died that you couldn't get information from, or was everybody still alive?
No, you're exactly right. There are people that had died. The person who was the supposed driver of a getaway car was dead. The young man whose name was on the reel-to-reel tape and who was known as having some conflicts with the law officers in that area, and whose name and license numbers from his parents' car was actually in the Sheriff J.T. Hall's notepad when he was found dead, he had died also. So 2 of the major people, I think, who could have been suspects were gone. And that's part of the problem with the cold case. And that's one of the reasons that they wanted it opened at the 50-year mark, because it's kind of like a Hail Mary. This is it. This is our last chance. People are going to be dead. Too many people are going to be dead to solve the case after this.
Is there any statute of limitations on that? Or like it sounded almost like 50 years was, okay, if we go beyond that, despite the fact that people might be dead, it's just too long.
No, there is no statute of limitations. No. There was another famous case in the area, the Lyon sisters murderer. 10 and 12-year-old girls were abducted from a mall in broad daylight, raped, murdered, and their bodies burned. And that case had been solved by some of the same cold case detectives in 2015.
Oh, so they had a
So,
track record then.
yeah, so they had a track record. And that 2015 for that murder was actually the 40th anniversary.
Wow. So tell me about the trial itself. How did it roll out? How long was it? And then in the end, what happened?
Well, first of all, I'm going to tell this. It kind of gives some of the book away because I think it's kind of a roller coaster ride in the book of what happens. But there are two trials, actually.
Wow.
The first trial ended in a hung jury. And I was there every day for that trial.
How long did that one last?
That one lasted 5 days and then 3 days of deliberations. Between the first and the second trial, I underwent quadruple bypass surgery for my heart.
Good Lord.
I had no symptoms, didn't know it, but flunked a stress test. And so I was in the process of recovering when the second trial was going on, and I couldn't attend it.
Ah,
So for the second trial, I relied on the Philo family and information that I was able to obtain afterwards to reproduce and piece together the second trial. I would prefer not to give you the ending just
okay.
because I think
All
I'd like to
right.
save it for you and for your listeners to read the book.
Well, what was the length of time between the two trials, and what was the premise they used to retry?
The length of time, the first trial was in January of 2024, and the second trial was in June of 2024.
Okay.
And the first trial, there was the counts against him were felony murder, which is murder committed, first degree felony murder, murder committed when another crime is being committed, a felony like burglary is being committed, as well as just murder in the first degree itself, which was had been the Maryland law back in '71. They did not have the felony murder, so they also had that. That just premeditated murder, that someone had gone out and killed the deputy sheriff Hall. And in the first trial, the defense was able to win an acquittal on the charge of first degree or premeditated murder, and the second two counts were a hung jury, so that there was no decision on that. However, from the information I got from the jury, there was a 10-2 and 11-1 vote by the jury for guilty on the second two charges.
Okay, so that
So there's
maybe that convinced the prosecutor that they could go to a second trial with that kind
exactly.
of yeah. Okay, all right.
So they felt that they had a very good chance of winning a second trial.
Okay, all right. I was wondering, and it seemed like it happened quickly within the same year.
The judge in the case was going to retire, and she was all set to retire. But she wanted this case to be her last case, the last case that she had tried. And so she was the one that set it up to be done so quickly.
Hmm. So interviewing Carolyn about her dad, it's got to be traumatic, even if it's decades later. What was that experience like in gathering information for the book? Was that tough for you, or was she, I don't want to say over it, but just she wanted some justice, I think.
She would still be very emotional and at times even cry when talking about her dad. She'd never gotten over it.
Mm.
After 50 years, I think it was still raw, and she couldn't understand how this could never have been solved. She'd seen her husband as a police officer and then as a lawyer solve these cases and win justice for people. And why couldn't it happen for her? And then when her mother passed away, J.T. Hall's wife, in 2005, rather than letting it down, I think it made her even more want to get this thing settled and figure out what had gone on. We really developed a close relationship. I developed with Carolyn and with Bob Philo. They called themselves my second parents, although they would have had to have me at a very, very young age.
Well, been known to happen, right?
Yeah, exactly. it was emotional. I went over to their house several times because they didn't live that far. They lived in what's called McKinney, Texas, which is north of Dallas. And I would go over to their house, and they showed me pictures. They gave me all kinds of pictures of her father, and there was just a tremendous bond there. And because of the that bond, and then what happened with Larry, as far as his not having really a father figure, he actually, by his adopted family, got thrown out on the streets when he was 15 years old. There also becomes a second theme in the book about the relationship of a man or a child with their father. And I actually, even to some degree, explore my relationship with my father, who had died in the previous year at the age of 97.
Mm. Between the two styles of books that you've written, now this being your third one, what was the most unexpected thing something that happened writing this, going for a true crime kind of story that just threw you? Was there anything?
Yes, I think there were several things. I think first, because I had maybe a year to a year and a half between the time that I was asked to write the book and I was researching it, and then I was kind of seeing everything from the Hall Philo perspective. I was pretty much going up there to see someone who was guilty. And although he had this fancy now law firm of defending him, I was under the assumption that this was a slam dunk shut case, and it wasn't. And when you see the evidence, when you see things from both sides, it kind of threw me, and it kind of was like, I need to consider the possibility that this man didn't do this, and I need to be objective in my writing and really get all the different opinions. And so after a year and a half, I really had to shift my focus so that I could include everything.
Well, I imagine when you're that close to the family, the daughter, and you're hearing all this, it is very much one-sided.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because you've established that relationship, and it's like, I want her to have justice. I want him to be guilty, right?
Exactly. Exactly. I want her to have what we call closure.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody talked about that. We want closure for the family. The law officers talked about it. The prosecution, everybody said, we're here to get closure for the family. That's what everybody wants. And it was still both in Carolyn, who's now 80, and her brother Melvin, who's 84. It was still something that was raw. And Bob, Carolyn's husband, even in her granddaughter, who was 8 when JT was murdered, it was still something that they wanted closure. They wanted taken care of before they died.
No, I can imagine that. What about as far as has that inspired you? Because cold cases like this are really tough, right? When time goes on like that, they're probably the hardest to write about. Are you inspired to search for other opportunities, or are you going to slide back and hit healthcare again because it's gotten much better?
Yeah, right. I have outlined, and I'm not going to go into it with you now, but I do have outlined my next book, which is going to be a fiction novel, and it's going to be about what's happened in healthcare in the last 25 years. Because I really think.
See, I called it. I called it, didn't I?
You did. And it's amazing. And it's just, for someone like myself who's been a doctor for 40 years now, it's just mind blowing. Instead of being a doctor now, I'm a healthcare provider.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a little small thing, but it's just the whole relationship. Everything has changed. The insurance company, and I don't want to get on a soapbox here, but just briefly, I'm going to say that the insurance
I want the soapbox. I'm egging you on.
Okay. Are you all right? Okay, then I'm going to tell you, the health insurance companies have way too much power. They run medicine now. The doctors are told by them what medicines to prescribe, what procedures we can do, what surgeries we can do. They're the ones making the decision instead of the patient's doctor, and it's terrible. And it leads to terrible outcomes for patients. Nobody's happy except for the insurance executives who are pocketing hundreds of millions of dollars.
And billions. It's up at that
sure.
level. Yeah.
Sure.
One of the funniest and not funny commercials on today is, have you seen the one where there's a woman sitting on the table waiting for the doctor to come in? He comes in and he gets her name wrong, and then he gets the part of her body wrong that's hurting, and he says, well, they're all connected.
No, I haven't seen that
Yeah,
commercial.
I'm not gonna say who it was. I saw it literally this morning, and I was like, that is what healthcare is today.
You're so right. When I started out, say internists would see 8 to 12 patients a day. They would take their time with them. Now, in order to make a living, doctors in that field will see 30 to 40 patients, and they'll have physician extenders like nurse practitioners and physician's assistants to enable them to see more patients. So it's become a volume business. And I want to say one thing: all those years I took care of Carolyn before she asked me in 2021 to write this book, I would always look through her family history, and it would say, mother passed away 2005, father died age 53, 1971, and it would say he was diabetic, but I never asked what he had died from.
Mm.
Wouldn't it be interesting if doctors still took the time to go back and to talk to patients and ask them about these? Think of all the things that we miss. Look what I missed by not doing that for all those 30 years I took care of Carolyn.
Well, even from a healthcare perspective, family history is
Sure.
important.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. But for me, the family history is okay. Do you have any history in your family of colon cancer?
Yeah.
Because one of the big things I do is colonoscopy screening for colon cancer. And now, even just in the last 5 years or so, we screen for both stomach and pancreatic cancer because there's been shown to be genetic versions of both of those diseases. So both of those are now ones that we screen for. But to ask her, well, how did your father die? She and I could have had this discussion 30 years ago.
Wow. Do you think it would have still motivated you to write this book 30 years ago?
I don't know how much of a book there would have been,
Ah,
because I would have had the book that he had been murdered
right.
and the man he was like, but I would have nothing as far as how it had been done and what had happened. So I think it would have been an incomplete book. It would have been something that would have gotten my attention and bothered me, but it's not something that I think that the full details weren't there to write the book.
Well, I think it's fascinating. I think that everybody, because now you've got me curious as to what the heck happened in the second trial. And so now I have to go get it.
Yes.
But it's called A Second Shot, The Pursuit of Justice in Maryland's Oldest Cold Case Murder by Dr. Michael F. Weisberg. And I tell you what, when that other novel comes out, when you're finished with that and it's about healthcare, you're coming back for a longer discussion.
I would love to. I would love to come back because I thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. But yeah, I really think that it's gonna, just like the hospitals, I think blew people's doors off. No one was talking about it. Everybody was. It's like we accept things. We're like sheep. We follow
Yeah.
along. Doctors, unfortunately, have done that. Even though you have to be smart to get through medical school, you have to be hardworking. We take everything, we just go along with it, and it's gotten to the point where it's no longer. I don't think we can go along with it much longer.
Yeah. Well, we saw how you were punished during COVID for those who did speak up, and it wasn't
That's right.
it wasn't a happy trail for them when that happened. So I understand the pressure coming from above, but I think you're right. I think we're at a tipping point. I literally don't know a human being who's happy with the healthcare system in the United States.
And that includes doctors.
Yep, and that includes me. Anyway,
Yeah.
I appreciate your time, Michael. We're going to have you
My
back. I think
pleasure.
everybody needs to get the book. It's an awesome book. And thank you everyone for watching. This is Dave Warner with Small Town Life, and we will see you the next time.